the laugh stopped mid-room. Not a slow fade, not a trailing off. It stopped the way a song does when someone yanks the needle across vinyl, sharp, audible, leaving only the hum of silence and the faint tick of the kitchen clock. I was halfway through telling the story about the grocer who'd mistaken me for the health inspector, the one who'd offered me a bribe of bruised mangoes and apologies. My daughter-in-law had been smiling, politely, yes, but smiling. My granddaughter Lila had giggled into her napkin. Then my son spoke. "Mom, you're too embarrassing for guests." His voice was light. Almost a joke. Almost. But the silence that followed had weight, the kind that presses on your sternum and makes your teacup feel heavier than it should. I set it down carefully, the porcelain meeting the saucer with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. No tremor. Not yet. Around the table, no one moved. My daughter-in-law studied her plate. Lila's eyes darted between her father and me, uncertainty tightening the corners of her mouth. The Sunday roast cooled between us, steam no longer rising. I'd worn my lilac blouse, the one with the pin-tuck pleats. I'd ironed the tablecloth that morning, set out the good crockery, the set my mother had given me when I married. I'd laughed too loudly, perhaps. Gestured too much. Existed too visibly in a room I'd cleaned at dawn. Right, I said quietly. Of course. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. The message had been delivered in increments over months, over years, gentle corrections about my volume, my opinions, the way I dressed for outings. This was simply the first time it had been named aloud, in front of witnesses, over food I had made. I smoothed my napkin. Picked up my fork. Resumed eating as though my appetite had not just walked out of the room and closed the door behind it. The meal finished in polite murmurs. Weather. Work. Lila's piano exam. I cleared plates, waved off help, stood at the sink while voices drifted from the lounge. When they left, my son kissed my cheek, habit, not warmth, and reminded me they'd be hosting next Sunday. Smaller gathering, he said. Just us. After the door clicked shut, I stood in the hallway. The house felt larger, emptier, like a coat several sizes too big. I touched the wall where the family photos hung, my fingers tracing the frame around a picture of my son at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, arms flung around my neck. Asterisk respect isn't owed to youth alone. Asterisk the thought arrived whole, unasked for. I didn't write it down. Not yet. But I felt it settle somewhere beneath my ribs, a small stone I would carry. In 10 days, everything looked different. Not the furniture. Not the wallpaper or the angle of autumn light through the kitchen window. But the air itself had shifted, the way it does before a storm when the pressure drops and you taste metal on your tongue. I stood at the dining table, now cleared of Sunday's ghost, and laid out 8 cream envelopes. My handwriting, still steady, still the script I'd learned at convent school 70 years ago, curved across each one in blue-black ink. Names I hadn't spoken aloud in months. Colleagues from a library where I'd worked for 32 years. A former supervisor. 2 book club companions who drifted when I'd stopped hosting after my husband died. The invitations were simple. Cardstock, not fancy. Asterisk you are invited to afternoon tea. Saturday, the 18th. 2 o'clock. RSVP regrets only. Asterisk I didn't write hosted by. Didn't need to. They would know. Outside, the first evening rain began, soft percussion on the slate path. I sealed each envelope, tongue to glue, the taste faintly bitter and industrial. Through the window, the front gate stood ajar. I'd been meaning to oil the hinge for weeks, but the creak had become a kind of early warning system, announcing arrivals before the bell. I stacked the envelopes in my handbag. Tomorrow, the post office. Tonight, I made tea for one and sat in the chair by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Asterisk I didn't plan revenge, just a reintroduction. Asterisk the words came like that now, unbidden. A voice steadier than the one I used aloud. I sipped my tea and let the rain speak for me, drumming certainty into soil. It hadn't always been sharp words and silences. The erasures had been polite. Incremental. The kind you don't name because naming them sounds petty, sounds like you're keeping score, sounds like you've become the difficult mother they warn about in women's magazines. It started, or perhaps I only started noticing, 3 Christmases ago. I'd brought a trifle, my mother's recipe, layers of sherry-soaked sponge and custard that took half a day to assemble. My daughter-in-law had smiled, said thank you, placed it on the sideboard. It was never served. Later, I found it still in its dish by the back door, a note tucked under the rim, * so kind, but we're watching sugar this year. * the next holiday, I brought wine. We've already got plenty, Mum, my son said, not unkindly, setting my bottle beside 6 others, all with labels I didn't recognize, all presumably better. I stopped bringing things. Then I stopped offering opinions. My comment about Lila's screen time, perhaps an hour less, was met with a patient smile and a reference to new research I hadn't read. My suggestion about the garden mulch was gently overridden, they'd hired someone who knew best. When I mentioned the news, my son would fact-check me aloud, phone in hand, as though I were a student submitting shoddy work. I became smaller. Spoke less. Laughed quietly. At gatherings, I noticed my seat had migrated, from the head of the table to the side, then to the extension leaf they added when numbers required. My stories were interrupted, not maliciously, just superseded by louder voices, younger anecdotes, work troubles that mattered more. I stopped telling stories. When I looked for the small porcelain bird I'd kept on the mantel, a gift from a trip to Scotland with my husband, it had vanished. We tidied, my daughter-in-law explained. It clashed with the new decor. I found it later, in a box in the garage, wrapped in newspaper from 2 years prior. I stopped asking where things had gone. Bit by bit, I became a guest in moments I'd once anchored. Birthdays were planned around my son's schedule, then celebrated a week late with apologies and reheated cheer. My grandchildren's recitals were texted to me as afterthoughts, * Lila did great. Sorry, thought we'd sent the date. * I was tolerated. Accommodated. Loved, I think, in the way one loves an old piece of furniture, valued for history, slightly in the way, easier not to move. Some erasures happen by manners, not malice. Sitting now in my lounge, the rain still tapping outside, I turned that line over like a shell found on a beach. Smooth on one side, sharp-edged on the other. It was true, and it was not an excuse. I rose, walked to the drawer where I kept old photographs. My husband's face looked back at me from a dozen frames, forever 53, forever smiling at a joke I'd just told. He'd never worried about being too loud, too much. He'd filled rooms without apology. I touched his face through the glass. I've been half a person, I whispered. I'd like the rest of me back. No answer. Just the creak of the house settling, and the distant hum of the fridge. But it was enough. This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is coincidental. The financial and legal steps described are for narrative purposes only and do not constitute professional advice. I started with a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, though it looked like one at first, blue pen, ruled paper, the kind I'd used for years to organize parish bake sales and library inventory. But the title at the top read, * Things I No Longer Owe. * I wrote it sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning, the house quiet except for the hiss of the kettle coming to boil. Sunlight slanted through the east window, pale and clean, the kind of light that makes dust motes visible and lies impossible. The first items came fast, * an apology for my laugh. **, permission to occupy space. **, justification for my stories. Then slower, deeper, * explanations for money I've earned. **, access to accounts I've been removed from. Gratitude for being included in my own grandchild's life. I paused. Reread. The words sat stark on the page, each one a small indictment I hadn't meant to write but couldn't unwrite. My hand cramped. I set the pen down, flexed my fingers. The kettle screamed. I made tea, loose leaf, the ritual of warm pot, measured spoon, the bloom of bergamotta's water met leaves, and returned to the list. Added 3 more, silence when I disagree. Smallness for someone else's comfort. My name on documents I've never seen. That last one had been gnawing at me for weeks. My son had asked me to sign power of attorney papers last spring, framed it as practicality, just in case, Mum. Makes everything easier. I'd signed, too tired to argue, too uncertain of my ground. But I'd never received a copy. And when I'd asked my bank about my savings account, one I'd opened 40 years ago, the teller had hesitated, then said a joint holder had been added. I hadn't added anyone. I folded the list in half. Slipped it into the leather folder I'd found at the back of the closet, the one I'd used when I worked. It still smelled faintly of ink and old paper, the scent of competence. That afternoon, I walked to the bank. The girl behind the counter was young enough to be my granddaughter, bright-eyed and efficient. I asked to review all accounts in my name. She typed, frowned, typed again. There's a joint signatory on your savings, she confirmed. Added 14 months ago. Do you want to remove him? I said. Calm. Clear. And I'd like statements for the last 2 years. Paper copies. She blinked. Of course. Just a moment. While I waited, I studied the posters on the wall, mortgage offers, investment plans, smiling stock photo families. None of them showed women my age alone. We were always paired, with spouses, with adult children, with financial advisors who looked trustworthy and male. I smiled to myself. When the statements arrived, I saw it, small transfers out, regular as clockwork, to an account number I didn't recognize. Not large sums. Nothing that would trigger alarm. Just enough to thin my balance, month by month, into something manageable, controllable. I'd like to open a new account, I told the girl. In my name only. Transfer the balance today. She nodded, no questions, and slid the forms across the desk. I signed my name, my full name, the one I was born with, the one I'd set aside when I married, and felt something uncurl in my chest. Balance isn't only in accounts, it's in self. Walking home, folder under my arm, I felt the weight of paper and ink as a kind of ballast. Proof. Agency. The beginning of a border I would draw in careful, indelible lines. That night, I added to the list, control of money I saved. And beneath it, in smaller script, the ability to host my own table again. The locksmith arrived on a Thursday morning, then idling at the curb, toolbox slung over his shoulder like a soldier's kit. He was younger than I'd expected, polite, didn't ask why I was changing locks on a house I'd lived in for 34 years. I didn't explain. Just handed him tea in a chipped mug and watched him work, old lock drilled out, new brass cylinder fitted, 2 keys cut on a machine that whined and spat metal dust. When he finished, he set both keys in my palm. That's it. No one gets in unless you let them. I paid him in cash. Closed the door. Turned the lock. The sound was different. Heavier. Final. I stood in the hallway, back against the door, and breathed. The house smelled like morning, toast, soap, the faint must of old carpet, but it felt new. Or perhaps I felt new in it, as though I'd been a tenant and only now signed the lease in my own name. I walked room to room, opening curtains I'd kept half closed out of habit, out of some old instinct that widows shouldn't draw attention. Sunlight pooled on the floor, turned the dust golden, made the furniture look shabby and beloved instead of just shabby. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle. The hiss and tick of gas igniting, the slow rumble of water heating, sounds I'd heard 10,000 times, but today they sounded like applause. Asterisk every door sounds different when it knows you own it. Asterisk I brewed tea. Poured it into my favorite cup, the one with the hairline crack that my daughter-in-law had once suggested I replace. I drank slowly, standing at the counter, watching sparrows bicker in the hedge outside. I didn't call my son to tell him about the locks. Didn't ask permission, didn't offer explanation. He still had a key, the old one, brass worn smooth from years of use. It would no longer fit. He would find out. That was its own kind of conversation. I washed my cup, dried it, set it back on the shelf. The house was quiet, but not lonely. Solitude, I was learning, is not the same as loneliness. One is chosen. The other is imposed. I chose this. By evening, I'd rearranged the lounge, moved the armchair back to the window where I liked it, relocated the lamp my son had shifted because it blocked the flow. I unearthed a wool throw from the linen cupboard, one I'd knitted the winter after my husband died, and draped it over the sofa. The room looked like mine again. I made a simple dinner, soup, bread, cheese, and ate at the table instead of the couch. Lit a candle, not for occasion, just for light. The flame shivered in its glass, throwing soft shadows on the wall. Outside, the evening settled blue and cold. I locked the door, new lock, clean click, and felt the day close behind me like a book finished, a chapter turned. Tomorrow, I would write the invitations. Tonight, I breathed freer in new silence, and it was enough. He arrived unannounced on Saturday afternoon. I heard the gate creak, then footsteps on the path, purposeful, quick. The doorbell rang twice, impatient. I dried my hands on a towel, smoothed my skirt, and opened the door. My son stood on the step, key in hand, confusion tightening his face. My key doesn't work. No, I said. It wouldn't. He stared. You changed the locks? I did. A pause. Behind him, a car idled at the curb, his wife in the driver's seat, Lila in the back. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. Why? I stepped aside. Come in. I'll make tea. He hesitated, then followed me into the kitchen. I filled the kettle, set out cups, moved with the calm of ritual while he stood by the counter, key still in his hand like evidence. Mom, what's going on? I'm making changes, I said. Measured tea into the pot. Small ones. Necessary ones. Changing locks without telling me isn't small. I met his eyes. Neither is adding your name to my bank account without asking. The silence was immediate, thick. His mouth opened. Closed. I didn't, he stopped. Started again. That was for your protection. In case something happened. Nothing happened. But it could. You're not, he caught himself, but I heard the end of the sentence hovering. Asterisk you're not young. Asterisk I'm not incapable, I said quietly. And I'm not a liability you manage. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to help. Help requires asking. The kettle screamed. I poured water over leaves, replaced the lid, set the pot between us. Neither of us reached for it. You're being unreasonable, he said, voice rising slightly, frustration bleeding through the careful control. I'm your son. I'm looking out for you. You're managing me, I corrected. There's a difference. He exhaled sharply, dragged a hand through his hair, gesture I recognized from his childhood, the one he made when a math problem wouldn't solve. What do you want from me? I poured tea into his cup. Into mine. The silence stretched, but I didn't rush to fill it. Let it sit. Let him sit in it. Finally, I spoke. I want you to ask before you act. I want you to listen when I speak. I want to be treated as though I still have capacity and dignity, not as though I'm a problem you're solving in advance. I never said you didn't have to. His hands curled around the cup. I watched his knuckles pale, watched him wrestle with words he didn't want to say. Outside, the car horn tapped lightly, his wife, signaling time. I have to go, he muttered. All right. He set the cup down, untouched. Walked to the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. I don't know what you want me to do. Knock, I said. When you visit. Knock, and wait for me to answer. He looked at me, something raw and young flickering behind his eyes, confusion, maybe hurt, but he nodded. Once. Stiff. Okay. He left. I watched through the window as he climbed into the car, saw him shake his head, saw his wife's hand on his shoulder. The car pulled away. I returned to the kitchen. Poured his tea down the sink, rinsed the cup. My hands were steady. Asterisk volume can't defeat calm. Asterisk I said it aloud, just to hear it in the empty room. The words held. I sat at the table and added a line to my list, asterisk permission to enter my home uninvited. Asterisk then I folded the paper, slipped it back into the leather folder, and returned to the work I'd started that morning, writing invitations. Mrs. Fernandez arrived on Tuesday with a tin of biscuits and an apology. I know I should have called first, she said, standing on my step in a cardigan 2 sizes too large and smelling faintly of lavender. But I saw you in the garden yesterday and thought, well, I thought I'd check in. I smiled. Opened the door wider. You're welcome. Always. She stepped inside, glanced around with the quick, polite assessment of a woman who notices everything and comments on nothing. Looks lovely. Brighter than I remember. I opened the curtains. Good. She handed me the tin. Coconut. I made too many. We settled in the lounge, tea brewing, biscuits arranged on a plate between us. Mrs. Fernandez was a decade older than me, widowed longer, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken. We'd exchanged pleasantries over fences for years but had never quite crossed into friendship, not for lack of warmth, just lack of time, of space, of permission I hadn't known I needed to ask. I heard your son visited, she said, pouring milk into her cup with careful precision. I raised an eyebrow. The walls are thinner than I thought. She laughed, low and knowing. The gate creak carries. And his voice, a bit. She sipped. I wasn't eavesdropping. Just aware. He wasn't pleased I'd changed the locks. Good for you. I blinked. Good? Very. She set her cup down. My daughter tried the same. Wanted me to add her to my accounts, move into a granny flat behind her house. For my safety, she said. Her smile was small, sharp. I told her I'd outlived a war, a husband, and 3 recessions. I'd manage. And? She sulked for a month. Then she got over it. Mrs. Fernandez took a biscuit, bit into it, brushed crumbs from her lap. They mean well, mostly. But meaning well isn't the same as doing right. And sometimes they need reminding we're still capable of deciding what right is. I felt something unnod in my chest. I thought I was being petty. You're being clear. That's different. She leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. What else are you doing? I hesitated. Then told her, the bank account, the list, the invitations I'd been writing. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she nodded slowly. When? Saturday. 2 o'clock. How many? 8 invitations. 4 RSVP so far. You'll need more biscuits, she said. I'll bring a batch Friday. Almond, if you like. You don't have to, I know. She smiled. I want to. Besides, I'd like to meet these people. Anyone you're brave enough to invite is worth knowing. We talked for another hour, about her daughter's upcoming visit, the community luncheon at the church hall, the new family across the street with the noisy dog. The conversation drifted, easy, unforced. She told me about the crochet group she'd joined, how the youngest member was 62 and thought herself a novelty. We age loudest in silence together, she said, half to herself, threading her fingers around her cup. Alone, we're easy to ignore. Together, we're a committee. I laughed, surprised by the sound of it, how long it had been since I'd laughed with someone instead of at myself. When she left, she paused at the door. You're doing the right thing. I hope so. You are. She patted my hand. And if your son doesn't see it now, he will. Or he won't. But you'll be fine either way. The gate creaked as she left, the sound familiar now, almost friendly. I stood at the window and watched her walk home, steady and unhurried, and thought, I want to be like her when I'm 80. Then I realized I already was. I just hadn't been paying attention. I returned to the dining table, where the invitations lay in a neat stack, and wrote 3 more names. People I hadn't seen in years. People I'd let drift because I'd assumed I was the one not worth keeping. By evening, I'd posted them all. By Wednesday, 2 more RSVPs arrived. By Thursday, I had 7 confirmed guests. On Friday, Mrs. Fernandez arrived with almond biscuits and a small posy of marigolds from her garden. For your table, she said. Something alive. I set them in a jar by the window, their bright faces turned toward light, and felt the house hum with anticipation. I turned the list over in my hands, the paper soft from handling, edges creased. Things I no longer owe. 11 lines now, each one a small reclamation. But tonight, I needed a different list. I smoothed a fresh sheet of paper on the table and wrote at the top, people who knew me when I was whole. The names came slowly at first, then faster. Anita, head librarian, retired. Mr. Greaves, who supervised the archives. Colleen and Majida from book club. Ruth, my neighbor before the Fernandez moved in. I paused. Added 2 more, Dr. Hoff, who delivered my son and sent Christmas cards for 30 years. Francis, who taught me to make proper scones and never condescended. 7 names. 7 people who had known me as competent, funny, capable. 7 witnesses to a self I'd folded away. I pulled the box of blank note cards from the drawer, cream stock, simple, elegant. My daughter-in-law had given them to me 2 birthdays ago, still wrapped. I'd never found an occasion worthy. This was worthy. I wrote each invitation by hand, black ink, my best script, you are invited to afternoon tea Saturday, November 18th, 2 p.m. My address, RSVP regrets only. No theme. No explanation. Just an invitation to occupy space I was claiming back. I signed each one with my full name, not Mum, not Mrs. Just my name as it had been before marriage reshaped it. Sealing the envelopes, I felt a strange alchemy, paper and ink and audacity becoming something weightier. Each envelope was a small declaration, a flag planted. Reclamation has postage due. I almost laughed at the thought. Instead, I stacked the envelopes in my handbag and made a note, post office, tomorrow morning. That night I designed a small menu on the back of an old shopping list, sandwiches, cucumber, smoked salmon, egg salad. Scones, ask Francis for recipe reminder. Biscuits, Mrs. Fernandez bringing almond. Tea, Earl Grey, chamomile, mint. Marigolds for table. I studied it. Practical. Manageable. Mine. I added one more line, asterisk polish the silver teapot. Asterisk the next morning, I walked to the post office. The clerk weighed each envelope, stamped them with a satisfying thunk, and slid them into the outgoing bin. Special occasion? She asked. Yes, I said. Barry. On the walk home, my phone rang. My son. I let it go to voicemail, listened later, asterisk mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Call me back. Asterisk his voice was careful, controlled. I heard the edge beneath it, worry, or irritation, hard to tell. I deleted the message. Not out of spite. Out of focus. I had 4 days until Saturday. 4 days to prepare a table, a self, a moment that would reset the terms of how I was seen. I had no time for apologies I didn't owe. That afternoon, I called Frances. She answered on the third ring, voice bright with surprise. I'm hosting tea Saturday, I said. I need your scone recipe. A pause. Then, the one with buttermilk? That's the one. I'll email it. Or better, I'll bring the ingredients and we'll make them Friday. If you'll have me. I'd love that. We talked for 20 minutes. She caught me up on her daughter's wedding, her new hobby painting watercolors, the cruise she'd taken to Norway. I told her about the garden, the weather, small truths that didn't include the last 5 years of smallness. When we hung up, I felt lighter. By Wednesday, 5 RSVPs had arrived, texts, calls, 1 handwritten note. By Thursday, 7 confirmed. On Friday, Frances arrived at noon with flour, butter, a jar of homemade jam, and a grin. Let's bake, she said. We worked side by side in the kitchen, her hands still deft despite arthritis, mine remembering the rhythm I'd learned decades ago. The dough came together under our palms, soft and elastic. We cut rounds, brushed tops with cream, slid the trays into the oven. While they baked, we sat at the table with tea, the smell of butter and vanilla filling the house. Why now? Frances asked gently. I considered the question. Because I forgot I was allowed. She nodded. Didn't pity, didn't probe. Just nodded. The scones emerged golden, perfect. We let them cool on racks, and Frances showed me the trick of splitting them with a fork instead of a knife, keeps them fluffy. Before she left, she hugged me at the door. Proud of you. For scones? For this. She gestured vaguely at the house, at me, at the air between us. For refusing to disappear. After she left, I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by scones and the lingering warmth of the oven, and thought, asterisk I am not disappearing. Asterisk I said it aloud. I am not disappearing. The house listened. I believed it. The rain came Friday night, steady and soft, drumming the kind of lullaby that makes you think about everything you buried. I sat by the window in the lounge, cup of chamomile cooling in my hands, and watched water bead and race down the glass. The street outside blurred into impressionist smudges, amber streetlights, the dark bulk of parked cars, the occasional flicker of movement as a fox slipped between gardens. Tomorrow. The word sat heavy in my chest. Tomorrow, people would come. Sit at my table. See me, not as appendage or inconvenience, but as host, as person, as whole. What if they didn't come? What if they came and found me lacking? What if I'd misremembered who I was, and they reminded me I'd always been small, forgettable, easy to leave? The doubts circled like birds I couldn't shoo. I sipped the tea, lukewarm now, faintly bitter, and set the cup aside. On the arm of the chair lay the coat I'd pulled from the back of the closet that afternoon. Wool, charcoal gray, tailored. I'd worn it to work every autumn for a decade, then retired it when my husband died, as though joy and formality had been interred with him. I'd tried it on earlier. It still fit. I ran my hand over the fabric now, felt the weave under my fingers, real, solid, expensive in a way I'd stopped allowing myself. The lining was silk, cool and whispering. In the pocket, I'd found a receipt from a cafe, dated 8 years ago, and a button I'd meant to resew. I would wear it tomorrow. Not for warmth. For memory. For the woman who'd bought it, who'd walked into rooms without apology, who'd believed she had something worth saying. The rain intensified, a sudden gust throwing water against the window like gravel. I flinched, then laughed at myself. Nerves, just nerves. I rose, walked to the kitchen. The scone sat under a clean cloth on the counter. The silver teapot gleamed on the shelf, polished until I could see my warped reflection in its belly. I'd set out the good china that afternoon, counted cups and saucers twice, arranged and rearranged the small vase of marigolds Mrs. Fernandez had brought. Everything was ready. Except me. I filled a glass with water, drank it slowly, leaned against the counter. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant, lazy, the sound of a sky clearing its throat. Even rain rinses stage fright. I smiled. Whoever I was becoming, she had a sense of humor. I checked the dining table once more, 8 place settings, linen napkins folded into careful triangles, the marigolds bright against white cloth. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lavender sachet I tucked into the sideboard. It looked like a table someone loved. I turned off the lights, checked the locks, new lock, solid click, and climbed the stairs. In my bedroom, I laid the gray coat over the chair, set out my blouse and skirt, the small pearl earrings I'd worn on my wedding day. Tomorrow's armor, chosen with care. I slid into bed, pulled the duvet to my chin, and listened to the rain slow, soften, fade into the hush of a street settling into sleep. Tomorrow, I would host. Tomorrow, I would be seen. Tomorrow, I would not apologize for taking up space. I closed my eyes. The rain whispered agreement. Saturday arrived clear and cool, the sky rinsed pale blue, the kind of morning that feels like an exhale after held breath. I woke early, habit, not alarm, and lay still for a moment, listening. No rain. No wind. Just the distant chatter of sparrows and the low hum of the heating clicking on. Today. I rose, showered, dressed with the care of a soldier suiting for parade, blouse buttoned to the collar, skirt pressed, earrings fastened, coat draped over the chair as talisman. I made tea, ate toast I didn't taste, washed the plate twice. By noon, the table was set. Sandwiches assembled, arranged on tiered plates. Scones wrapped in linen. Mrs. Fernandez's almond biscuits fanned beside them. 3 teapots ready, Earl Grey, chamomile, mint. I stood in the doorway and surveyed the room. It looked like hope, plated and polished. At 1:30, I changed into the gray coat. Checked my reflection in the hall mirror. The woman looking back was older than I remembered, but steady. Her hands didn't shake. At 1:50, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to Anita, former head librarian, silver-haired and smiling, holding a bottle of elderflower cordial. I wasn't sure if I should bring something, she said. But I did anyway. Perfect, I said. Come in. She stepped inside, looked around, breathed in the scent of tea and lemon and flowers. Oh, this is lovely. The doorbell rang again. Colleen and Majida from book club, arriving together, laughing about the parking. Then Mr. Greaves, stooped but bright-eyed, with a box of chocolates. Ruth, my old neighbor, with a bunch of dahlias from her garden. By 2:15, 7 guests filled the lounge and dining room, voices layering into a warm hum of greeting and catching up in laughter. I moved among them, pouring tea, offering sandwiches, listening. They spoke of grandchildren and hobbies and the small dramas of retirement. They asked about me, not perfunctory, but genuinely. How have you been? What have you been doing? I told them. Not everything. But enough. The library work I missed. The garden I was reclaiming. The quiet I'd learned to choose instead of endure. They listened. At 2:40, the doorbell rang again. I excused myself, crossed the hall, opened the door. My son stood on the step. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Behind me, laughter rose and fell. Behind him, the street stretched empty. "I didn't think you'd come," I said quietly. "You didn't invite me." He shifted, hands in pockets, eyes flicking past me to the sound of voices. I wanted to apologize. I waited. I didn't realize. He stopped. Started again. I thought I was helping. I didn't see I was, he exhaled. "I'm sorry." The words sat between us, small and insufficient and real. I stepped aside. "Come in. There's tea." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He entered, and I closed the door, gently, not a statement, just a fact. I led him to the dining room. Introduced him, my son, and watched him shake hands, accept a cup, fold himself into a chair by the window. He didn't dominate. Didn't correct. Didn't manage. He sat and listened, and when Anita asked him about his work, he answered briefly and turned the conversation back to her. I watched from the kitchen doorway, teapot in hand, and felt something old and tight unwind. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a door, left ajar. At 4 o'clock, the guests began to leave, hugs at the door, promises to meet again, thank yous that felt like blessings. Mrs. Fernandez was last, squeezing my hand. "You did beautifully. Thank you. For everything. Anytime." She glanced past me to where my son was helping stack plates. "He stayed." "He did." She smiled. "That's something." When the door closed, I returned to the dining room. My son stood by the table, holding 2 teacups. "I'll wash up," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." We worked in silence, him washing, me drying. The water ran warm. Outside, the afternoon light slanted gold. Finally, he spoke. "Your friends are nice." "They are." "I didn't know you'd kept in touch." "I hadn't. Until now." He rinsed a plate, handed it to me. "I didn't know you were unhappy." I dried the plate slowly. "I didn't say it. I should have asked." I set the plate on the stack. "Yes." We finished the dishes. He dried his hands on the towel, folded it with the precision I'd taught him as a boy. "I'll go," he said. "Let you rest." "All right." At the door, he paused. "Can I come by next week?" "Properly." "Knock first." I nodded. "I'd like that." He kissed my cheek, warmer this time, less habit, and left. I closed the door. Locked it. Stood in the quiet house, where the scent of tea still lingered and the marigolds glowed in the last of the light. Asterisk hospitality is courage served warm. Asterisk I said it to the empty room, and the room held it. The kitchen was clean, the guests gone, the house settling into evening's hush. I moved through the rooms, collecting stray napkins, straightening cushions, blowing out the candle I'd lit on the mantel. My son's teacup still sat by the sink, rinsed but not dried. I picked it up, felt the smooth porcelain, the faint warmth of water memory. He'd washed the dishes without being asked. Small thing. Not nothing. I dried it. Put it away. Outside, the light was fading, the sky deepening to violet. I stood at the window and watched the street lamps flicker on, one by one, stitching the dark with small certainties. He'd apologized. Not perfectly. Not enough to undo months of erasure, years of small cuts. But enough to crack the door. What I did with that door was mine to choose. I thought about the list tucked in the leather folder upstairs, asterisk things I no longer owe. Asterisk I thought about adding a new list, Asterisk things I might choose to give. Asterisk not out of obligation. Out of surplus. Out of strength. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed stillness. I made a cup of tea, chamomile, the last pot of the day, and carried it to the lounge. The marigolds on the side table had begun to close, petals folding inward for the night. I touched one gently, felt the velvet softness. I settled into the chair by the window, cup cradled in my lap, and let the silence wrap around me. No voices. No demands. No performance. Just me, and the cooling tea, and the sound of my own breathing. The afternoon had been loud, laughter, conversation, the bright clatter of teacups and goodwill. It had been wonderful. But this quiet, was essential. I sipped the tea. Let the warmth settle in my chest. Tomorrow, I would call Anita, thank her for coming. I would write a note to Frances, ask for her watercolor class schedule. I would text Mrs. Fernandez, maybe suggest a weekly tea, just the two of us. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to answer when my son called. But tonight, I simply sat. The window reflected my face back at me, faint and ghostly against the darkening street. I looked older than I felt. Or perhaps I felt older than I'd allowed myself to admit. Either way, I was here. Still here. Still visible, even if only to myself. I finished the tea, washed the cup, turned off the lights. Upstairs, I changed into my nightgown, folded the gray coat over the chair. Tomorrow I'd hang it back in the closet. Or maybe I'd leave it out. Wear it to the market. To the library. To wherever I decided to go. I climbed into bed, pulled the duvet close. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked once, twice, fell silent. The house creaked, settling. I closed my eyes. And slept. Sunday morning, I woke to knocking. Not urgent. Not angry. Just steady, 3 raps, a pause, 3 more. I pulled on my robe, descended the stairs, opened the door. My son stood on the step, hands in pockets, face uncertain. I know it's early. It's all right. I brought scones. From the bakery. He held up a paper bag, grease-spotted and warm. Thought maybe we could talk. I stepped aside. Come in. We sat at the kitchen table, the scones between us, tea brewing. Morning light pooled on the floor, pale and clean. He spoke first. I talked to Sarah. My wife. About yesterday. I waited. She said I've been controlling. That I've been treating you like you're incapable. He turned his cup in slow circles. I didn't see it. And now? Now I do. He met my eyes. I'm sorry. Really. I poured tea into his cup. Into mine. Thank you. I want to do better. I'd like that. We ate in quiet, the scones buttery and sweet. Not as good as Frances's. But good enough. After a while, he said, "Can I ask what changed?" For you? I thought about the question. About the list, the locks, the invitations. About the moment I'd decided I was tired of being small. I stopped waiting for permission, I said finally. I stopped believing I needed to earn space I already owned. He nodded slowly. The locks. The bank account. Yes. I shouldn't have done that without asking. I'll remove my name. This week. Good. He reached across the table, tentative, and rested his hand near mine. Not touching. Just near. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. You won't. But you can't keep me by holding too tight. He withdrew his hand. Nodded. Okay. We finished the scones. He helped wash up, again, unasked, and when he left, he kissed my cheek and said, "Next Sunday. I'll call first." Good. I watched him walk to his car, watched him drive away. Then I closed the door. The house was mine again. Quiet, warm, full of the morning. I returned to the kitchen. Made a second pot of tea, just for me. And I sat at the table, in the sunlight, and breathed. Respect grows best in unclenched hands. I wrote the line on a scrap of paper. Folded it. Tucked it into the leather folder with the lists. Someday, I might show him. Might explain the architecture of boundaries, the necessity of self-possession. Or maybe I'd keep it private. A truth I held for me. Either way, I was learning, not all lessons need to be taught aloud. Some we simply live, and let others witness. And that is enough. The weeks folded into a new rhythm. Tuesdays, I had tea with Mrs. Fernandez, her house one week, mine the next. We talked about everything and nothing, the state of the world, the price of butter, the small indignities and graces of aging. Thursdays, I volunteered at the library again. Just a few hours, reshelving returns, helping patrons find books. Anita had asked if I'd consider it, and I'd said yes before I could doubt myself. My son called before visiting. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I let it ring. When he came, he knocked. Waited. Didn't let himself in, even after I'd given him a new key, for emergencies, I'd said. Actual emergencies. He was learning. Slowly. But learning. We were learning. One Saturday in early December, I hosted again. Smaller gathering, just Francis, Anita, Mrs. Fernandez. We played cards, drank too much tea, laughed about things that weren't particularly funny but felt good to laugh about anyway. When they left, the house felt full instead of empty. I'd stopped measuring my worth by how much space I took up in other people's lives. Started measuring it by how much I enjoyed my own. It wasn't always easy. Some days, the old habits crept back, the urge to apologize, to shrink, to defer. But I caught them faster now. Named them. Set them aside. I bought new clothes. Not many. But a few pieces that fit well, that I liked, that made me feel like the woman I was becoming instead of the one I'd been. I wore the gray coat often. I started a small garden project, herbs in pots on the kitchen sill, then a patch of lavender by the front step. My hands remembered the work, the good ache of soil and growth. I wrote letters, real ones, pen and paper, to old friends I'd lost track of. Some wrote back. Some didn't. I minded less than I'd expected. In January, I went to a matinee alone. A film I wanted to see, midweek, the theater half empty. I bought popcorn, sat in the center, laughed aloud without self-consciousness. Afterward, I walked through the park, hands in pockets, face turned to the thin winter sun. No one was waiting for me at home. No one needed me to be anywhere but exactly where I was. And it felt, for the first time in years, like freedom. Spring came early, tentative and soft. I planted the marigolds Mrs. Fernandez had given me as seeds, watched them sprout and stretch toward light. The garden began to look intentional, loved. My son brought Lila by one Saturday. Just the two of them, no agenda. We baked biscuits, made a mess of the kitchen, laughed when the dough stuck to everything. Lila asked if she could stay overnight sometime. I said yes. When my son picked her up, he lingered at the door. She had fun. So did I. You seem. He searched for the word. Lighter. I smiled. I am. He nodded. Didn't ask why. Didn't need to. After they left, I brewed tea and carried it to the lounge. The evening stretched ahead, unhurried. I'd started keeping a journal, nothing profound, just dailiness. what I'd seen, done, felt. A record not for posterity, but for me. Proof I was still here, still noticing, still capable of wonder. I wrote, today, Lila asked if I'd ever been young. I said yes. She asked if I missed it. I said no. She looked surprised. I told her being young is lovely, but being sure of yourself is better. She didn't understand yet. Someday she will. I set the pen down. Sipped my tea. Outside, the light was fading, the sky streaked pink and amber. A blackbird sang from the hedge, insistent and clear. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The silence at that Sunday table. The sting of my son's words. The smallness I'd wrapped around myself like a coat too tight. I thought about the woman I was now. The one who changed locks and opened curtains and hosted her own table. They were the same woman. Just one had remembered she was allowed. I rose, walked to the window. The street was quiet, the evening settling in soft and blue. Tomorrow, I'd call Anita about the book club she was restarting. I'd weed the garden. I'd make soup and eat it slowly, savoring. Tomorrow, I'd live as though I deserved to. Because I did. I set my cup in the sink, turned off the lights, climbed the stairs. In my room, I changed into my nightgown, folded back the duvet, slid between cool sheets. The house breathed around me, familiar, mine, full of quiet and presence and the small hum of a life being lived on purpose. I closed my eyes. And rested. On a Tuesday in late April, I brewed tea for one and set out 2 cups. Not out of loneliness. Out of ritual. The second cup was a reminder, I was no longer waiting to be invited into my own life. I was host and guest both, sufficient and open. I poured the tea, Earl Grey, strong, bergamot blooming in steam. Filled my cup. Left the second empty. Not for anyone specific. Just for possibility. For the friend who might drop by. For the version of myself I was still meeting. For the future I hadn't yet written. I carried my cup to the chair by the window. Outside, the lilac bush I'd planted years ago had bloomed, pale purple clusters, heavy and sweet. The scent drifted through the open window, filled the room with spring and memory. I sipped my tea. Let the warmth settle. The house was quiet, but not silent. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, just the house settling, or maybe a ghost of all the years I'd lived here, all the selves I'd been. I didn't feel old. I felt present. The doorbell rang. I set my cup down, walked to the door, opened it. Mrs. Fernandez stood on the step, holding a small potted plant. Basil, she said. For your kitchen garden. Thought you might like it. I do. Come in. She stepped inside, glanced at the table. Oh, you're having tea. I am. Join me? I'd love to. I poured the second cup. We sat by the window, the lilac scent curling between us, and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. When she left, I washed both cups. Dried them. Set them back on the shelf. The house was quiet again. But I wasn't alone. I had myself. I had my garden, my table, my open door. I had the knowledge that I could be small or large, silent or loud, and still be whole. I had the keys to my own locks. I had tea, and time, and the choice to pour a second cup or not. Embarrassment? No, just a life unapologetically steeped. I said it aloud, tasting the words. They fit. I walked to the window, looked out at the street bathed in afternoon light. The world continued, cars passing, children cycling, the rhythms of a neighborhood I'd lived in for decades but was only now truly inhabiting. I was not too much. I was not too loud. I was not an inconvenience or a burden or a problem to be managed. I was a woman who had forgotten herself for a while, and then remembered. And that remembering, quiet, deliberate, unapologetic, was the most rebellious thing I'd ever done. I pulled the curtains wide. Let the light flood in. Stood in it, unashamed. And breathed. If this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs it. Not because they're broken. Because they're remembering.